welcome to the Irish Tech News podcast. I'm your guest host, Ian MacRae. I'm a psychologist and author of 6 work psychology books, including Dark Social, Understanding the Darker Side of Work, Personality, and Social Media. I've put together a 5-part mini-series on brains, communication, and digital behavior. I'm going to talk with 5 really interesting guests about mindset, brain health, psychological education on social media, algorithms and dating apps, and how Web3 and cryptocurrency communities form. My third guest is Dr. Julie Fratantoni, a cognitive neuroscientist at the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas. She serves as head of content innovation and user experience for the BrainHealth Project, a 10-year longitudinal research study seeking to define, measure, and improve brain health and performance across the lifespan. She is passionate about science communication and finds great joy in creating and sharing content that equips and empowers individuals to live a happier and healthier life. I'm going to talk to her about her work as a science communicator and how her work took her to explaining mental health on TikTok. She has some really interesting insights on how to use new and emerging communication tools to educate people about neuroscience and brain health.
Hi, Julie. Thanks so much for coming on the Irish Tech News podcasts. I'm really excited to talk to you because I think you've done some really interesting work both in combination with neuroscience and social media, and you're doing some work that I think is so important about public communication and helping people understand mental health, brain health, and psychology. So how did you get into that? How did you go from kind of neuroscience to talking about neuroscience on TikTok?
Sure. So it's funny. It was kind of an accident. I wasn't really intentionally trying to get into that space, but it was a happy accident. So a year ago, I was interviewed I did my first podcast interview, and I just shared it on my just personal Instagram, just like, oh, cool. Did this interview, and I was so surprised at how many friends that I hadn't spoken to since like middle school, or just kind of, people I hadn't talked to in forever. And they were like, hey, I listened to that and that was really helpful. Or like, I learned a lot, and I was like, oh, whoa. And it was funny because at the time I remember preparing for that interview and being so nervous and like having to have all these notes and things. And anyway, so that was kind of a neat pivot point for me in realizing, one, wow, I know a lot of things, and 2, that these things are really helpful. Most of my friends don't know them. And I think sometimes when you get into a very specialized area of expertise, or you just study something all the time, it just becomes like common, and it's like, oh, everybody knows this. But anyway, so it was a good reminder that no, everybody does not know this. And I think also just was really encouraging that people are so interested. They really want to know about their brain. So that was kind of what encouraged me to then say, well, first I was like, I should just have a more professional account for when I do interviews and things like that. But also, what a neat platform to really get to share this information with my friends. So that was kind of how I started it. And then as I got going, I just had so much fun with it. And then discovered that science communication is a thing. I didn't know that was a thing, that, you can major in that there's a whole field around it that's really starting to emerge. And I think it's an exciting time to be in science and also communication and the crossover.
Yeah, absolutely, especially because neuroscience is moving so quickly. The advances are happening so fast. And sometimes there's a big gap between the research and the academic side of it and practice and what people actually know about it and understand, right? Especially for people who it can really benefit, because knowing about yourself, how your brain works, how your emotions work, how all of this stuff impacts you is something that really profoundly impacts people's day-to-day life, right? So is there any reason that you went to TikTok in particular versus like, say, choosing, YouTube or doing Instagram Reels?
Yeah, so I started with Instagram, and then honestly, the reason I did TikTok was my sister encouraged me to. She is kind of in the marketing and social space, and she was like, she's like, you just need to go on TikTok. And I was kind of like, and so I did, and it was shocking. My first video, I didn't know what I was doing because I hadn't really used TikTok that much. And so I didn't add sound. I did like all these things wrong that you're not supposed to do. Didn't have hashtags, all. And my first video, I was literally just introducing myself. Like I was just like, hi, I'm a scientist. I want to share what I'm learning about the brain. And it got like 100,000 views. And I was like, wow, people are excited and really interested. And so I think the beauty of TikTok is really just the fact that it serves you up to so many people, that it has such a broad user base, and the way that the algorithm pushes out content to people that allows for discovery is unlike any other platform. So that was just really fun and exciting to just see like, wow, I can just really connect with people from everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've definitely picked it up quickly because I was watching a couple of your videos, and you had one of the things I really liked is in your you had a video about cannabis in the brain, and you had like the paper right behind it. So you were finding ways to integrate the actual research and a link to a citation in a very non-traditional way, but in a way that still gives people the resources to go have a look at the paper, read more of the research, understand the field if they want to do that. So how do you, I mean, do you just kind of learn by testing stuff out, trying that out, or where do you come up with ideas to do that?
Sure. Yeah, it's part of being a creator is also getting inspired and looking at whether it's other science communicators or just other creators that are, their content's totally different, but just the way they put together their videos and kind of different, whether it's editing techniques or using the green screen like you saw with the paper behind, just getting to play around with different things, and depending on what the topic is, yeah, really getting to think like, how can I make this information most engaging in a way that's going to capture people's attention, keep their attention, and then really actually help them learn something that they can use.
Yeah, and you've done a really good job of it. So where do you think people are getting their information about mental health? Do you think there's enough resources for especially younger people to learn about mental health? Is there information, disinformation? Or where are young people getting their information about brain health?
Honestly, I mean, most people, it's like Dr. Google.
Yep.
It's the internet, it's social media, it's podcasts, it's
Yep.
from their friends. People, some will read books for younger, but I think, or if they can afford to invest in counseling, but I would say social media is a primary source of that. And it's why you see accounts like the holistic psychologist or these other, these accounts that are just blowing up and have so many followers, because people are really hungry for this information and they want to learn. And it's harder and harder, to your point about misinformation, it's hard to know what information you can trust. And I think the really neat thing about, say, Instagram, and this is a bit of a contrast between Instagram and TikTok that I personally think, Instagram really allows you to feel like you know the person. So you can actually establish a sense of trust. There's a ways to have kind of a back and forth relationship. TikTok feels a little more one-sided. There's not like an easy avenue for direct messaging or really to even know the person on the profile. Like a lot of people just have an anonymous thing and their username is a bunch of numbers. And it's like, there's more of that kind of internet trolling feel, and then also with that you get comments and questions and things that people would probably never say in real life, whereas on Instagram I feel like when you're there you're like, I'm representing myself and I'm a real person, and it's a real more of a connection in that interaction, so it affords you that. But I think because of that, because of the desire to connect with a real person, to know like who is the person that's sharing this information, what are their credentials, are they trustworthy, what does their life look like, it kind of it just builds that credibility. So I think it helps, yeah. And even then, just because someone has letters after their name doesn't mean that their information is correct or what they're sharing is accurate. So people have to have a filter. But I think these younger generations, or definitely just anyone that's using a lot of social media, is having to get better and better at that, or we're having our own filters for what information we want to take in or which people we want to follow and things like that.
Yeah. So for anyone who's thinking about science communication, whether they're a very experienced neuroscientist or they're just starting out, is there anything that you wish you knew getting started, or do you have any advice for kind of scientists who think they should be on TikTok to explain their work?
Oh man, I would encourage any and every scientist to practice communicating what they're passionate about, what they're learning, and to learn how to say it in ways that the average person can understand, relate to, and really see the value in. Advice for, honestly, it's just start. That's half of it. It's just start. If you look at my earlier videos, you can tell that I've grown. Like my more recent ones, like you said, are improving. So I think it's kind of like just give yourself a baseline and put it out there and see, and then you learn and you see what people respond to and what they find interesting or what types of questions they'll ask. And so I think, just starting is the half of it. And really, those types of skills are beneficial no matter what. Like you have to give scientific presentations, but really being able to tailor the level of complexity depending on your audience that's so valuable.
So do you learn stuff from your audience? Like, is there stuff that you learn from how people react to your videos or your posts that you wouldn't necessarily learn in an academic setting?
I would say it's it's just great to get a different perspective. You know, when you're used to presenting to other academics or other people, you know, other experts, other clinicians, yeah, the types of questions you're going to get are just totally different. But I think what's fun about, you know, hearing from just like a lay audience is that you can really see, okay, what matters in the day to day. You know, I think it's kind of just like, it just helps ground, what is all this science for? And at the end of the day, it's like, is it helping this person in this way, or what, you know, kind of what's the translation to real life? And so I think that's something that is really important for especially scientists that get very niche in, you know, what they're studying, and it's drilled down so far that it can feel very removed from an actual person, or yeah, just how that can be applicable.
Yeah, I find that sometimes in my work too. It's interesting the questions that people ask. Just sometimes someone will ask a question, or you'll hear the same question over and over again. You're like, oh, okay, that's the kind of stuff you're thinking about or wondering about or questioning every day. But that's the kind of the answers that we have, and we know how to answer those questions fairly specifically, right? Like about, you know, mental health, or where to go for support, or how to understand your own kind of emotions and mental well-being, and things that address that. It's sometimes fairly straightforward, but you don't always know until you go out onto those platforms to ask.
Well, I was just going to say the other thing that I think their questions give insight into is a lot of people will ask about things that are, whether it seems like misinformation or they're like, I'm not sure about this. It kind of tells you what's in the culture, like what's being talked about a lot. So for example, something like, should I be taking probiotics or prebiotics? Or, you know, what is this microbiome thing? Or like, you see all these companies, I guess like a lot of products, there's so much, so many new products in the neuro health, you know, longevity, like all the supplements, I mean, brain games, there's so many things that we're being marketed to. And so I think it also shows you kind of just like, yeah, what's happening, what are people being, what targeted ads are they getting, and then how are they responding to that? And it's making them curious, which is neat. So I think it speaks to that too.
So that's good too. So you're seeing a real curiosity. It's not people who just say, okay, this is what I've heard and I believe it. There's kind of a skepticism and an interest and kind of probing those ideas on social media. It's not just consumption of information, it's questioning it too.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a healthy sense of skepticism.
That's good. Glad to hear
curiosity. That. Yeah.
So how do you choose the content? Like because you've got a range of different topics. So what makes you choose a certain topic or go on a certain direction? Is it what people are interested in, or do you have certain research interests that you focus on?
Well, I nerd out on this stuff in my free time. So it's like I'm always reading a book or listening to a podcast or doing something in my own health journey that I'm curious to understand more about. And so typically I just share, I kind of treat it as, you know, if I'm calling up my sister, or I'm calling up my best friend and just sharing like, hey, I just listened to this and this is what I took away from it and this is how it's helped me, or these are some tweaks I'm going to make in my life, that it's kind of sharing from that lens of just like, this is something that I find useful, and if I find it useful, someone else probably does too. So it's kind of thinking about it, and then obviously it makes it that much easier because like I'm already reading about it, I'm already interested, and then it's just a matter of putting it together and sharing it. I also will do, you know, like I said, the things that people will comment, like that will spark more questions. They'll be like, oh, can you do a video on this? Or I'll use like the polling features or do Ask Me Anythings and kind of just take note of the types of questions. There's sometimes like, you know, there's certain questions that pop up a lot. So I'm like, okay, I should make a video on that.
So what are those questions what are the most common questions that you get?
Gosh, it's such a variety. People always want to know more about brain food, like what can I eat that's good for my brain? And that's a really tough one because there's a lot that goes into that, and being able to give a recommendation. Obviously I can share what different research studies say, but I think that there's so much just personalization that needs to happen in terms of just testing, or, you know, just really understanding so it's hard to give general recommendations for those things. People want to know about that. People always want to know about, you know, like I said, the supplements is a big one. And then just kind of like, I think lifestyle things, like it's just like, what can I do? I would say actually the number one thing that at least my community has voiced is anxiety. It is huge. It is the number one. Anytime I do a poll, anxiety is number one. And so that's something that people are really struggling with, and looking for resources and outlets and things that can help with that. and then also sleep,
Yeah.
and then focus. Yeah, distractions, being able to really pay attention when they want to. So
Yeah, so there is a whole bunch of research, right, about growing anxiety levels in young people. So that's something you're really seeing online.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I don't know if it's a cross between, it's probably a little bit of both. I don't know, of just an increased level in anxiety, but then an increased freedom in being able to talk about it, or
Yeah.
just, I feel like we're in a neat time where people are more and more comfortable sharing about that, or being open. So I think it's it's an interesting thing. And I also think, I mean, there's so many contributing factors and different types of anxiety that to not kind of go down that rabbit trail, but I guess the one thing I would say about, in terms of, I guess advice to other professionals that want to be on social media, I mean, there's extensive research. There's so much showing just this relationship between things like anxiety and depression and time spent on these social platforms.
Yeah.
So I do have to say, something I've been personally trying to come to terms with, or figure out the right balance for myself and how I want to use my platform in that way. It's like, one, this is where people are getting their information. This is where they're hanging out. This is where they're learning things. So it's like, you want to be there, you want to meet them where they're at. But then also, sometimes I feel a little conflicted of like, am I feeding into this very, feeding the beast of this thing that is kind of contributing to a lot of these problems? And is it like, I'm, drawing you back to spend more time on this app as opposed to doing things in real life? And so I think that's hard, because of course nothing is inherently bad. It's all in how you use it. And I think technology is a beautiful tool, and especially these social platforms have really allowed me to just connect with people all over the world, right, in ways I never would have imagined. But at the same time, just really seeing, even as a creator, wanting to be responsive, and you've got things like the algorithm to keep up with, and understanding how often I post, or who's going to see these things, or how many people they're going to push it out to. And it can become, I would say I've seen, as I've become a little more active in just this past month, like I've seen my own anxiety increase. So I think there's this interesting balance of like, just because all of these tips and tricks and the science behind it doesn't make you immune to it. And it's a real challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've experienced that myself too, and I have this kind of weird love-hate relationship with social media. Like, I think pretty much everyone who uses it does, about how much to use it, and when it's productive, when it's counterproductive, when it's useful. And I find being really conscious about how I'm reacting to stuff I'm seeing is useful too. Like, every once in a while I have to go through phases of unfollowing stuff because I thought it was productive, but it turns out it's just counterproductive. It's not helpful, and it's not really helpful for mental health, or necessarily for understanding the world. So kind of reflecting on what kind of behaviors are healthy, when it's useful and productive, versus when it's time to just trim down the time or trim out certain types of content is really necessary. And it's something that you can't do once, right? You kind of have to continually adapt and understand how you're using it and reflect on that.
Absolutely. I love the power of the unfollow.
Yeah, definitely.
That's really good.
Sometimes it's absolutely necessary. Do you think, I think some kind of scientists, neuroscientist experts are worried about getting trolled, getting really criticized, having really negative feedback if they go onto social media, and if they don't have a lot of experience, don't necessarily know how they'll be received. Do you think that's a risk? How can experts manage that, especially if they're just getting started or figuring out what they want to talk about online?
Yeah, I would say that from my experience, and so this is, again, a difference in platforms. So I would say people on TikTok their comments are gonna be a little bit harsher and a little bit, they just say whatever because there's no relationship there, right? It's just a random video and another, whereas on Instagram, if they find you and they choose to follow you and they're seeing your content, that was much more of a investment, or they've decided that they kind of like you. But I will say, it's all about the value of your content. So if you could be, it could be quote boring, or it could be, you know what I mean? It doesn't need to have all this fancy editing or music or anything like that. But if what you're saying provides value, people want to hear it. So I would just encourage people in that to know that, and yeah, it's a vulnerable thing. Anytime you put any piece of content out, similar, like whether it's writing a book or whether it's, just posting a photo, you do open yourself up to any criticism. And I think for me, also kind of how you talked about having those healthy boundaries of knowing that. And like, so for me, I'm like, hey, if you're going to post something negative or critical, I'm deleting your comment and I'm blocking you. And I don't feel bad about it. It's like, there's no room for that. It's kind of like, that's just, you get to decide what you tolerate. But I do think that people, I would hope, at least I've been pleasantly surprised in just how people value good information. And so if it's, if you know your stuff and you're wanting to share that, I think it ends up being really well received typically.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice about setting your own boundaries going in and having a really clear idea about what content you're trying to produce, what topics you want to cover, and what kind of reactions you think are acceptable or you might want to moderate or get rid of. And knowing that before you start, because then if you set those boundaries early on, then you've got that clear framework. Otherwise, it's really easy to get drawn off down rabbit holes or different topics or different ideas and kind of lose control of the original purpose you might have set out to have.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to just be aware of is that no matter how well you explain something, someone's always gonna, perhaps interpret it the wrong way, or like someone, like a recent comment, someone was like, sounds like you only said the negative side of this. And I'm like, well, I actually put both in there. So I think you only heard the negative, or, you just kind of like that. And just being really careful I always reiterate, this is not medical advice. Like, make sure that you have a real care team of real people in your life that you're going to and experts. This should not be a replacement for. If anything, this can just supplement those relationships that you have in real life. And just being clear about what you do and do not cover, I think is helpful. And there was one other thing. Yeah. Oh, and I think also just being really, and especially as a scientist and wanting to really protect credibility and make sure that, everything I'm saying, I'm not going to say something wrong, or if I do, science is changing, we're learning new things all the time. So not being afraid to go back and say, hey, well, we actually learned this now. And this is, this is maybe more accurate now. So I think kind of having that balance, but, so there is the fear of like, there's a little bit of my perfectionism kicks in when I am recording. So I'm like, I can't use that word. I have to say it this way, or, or that they don't then extrapolate that to mean, oh, okay, well, so you said this is good for this, so more must be better. So I should go do that. And then it's like, okay, no, like this is just, anyway, just being really clear about what the information, like what you're saying and then how you want it to be used. But also at the end of the day, you can't control how people interpret it, which parts they hear or don't hear, and then how they want to go use that. So I think just knowing that, having a good conscience of knowing that I've done everything I can to explain this as thoroughly as possible, or to be, as clear or directive as to how this can be applied or helpful. But it's a tricky thing because, like I said, people can really take it and do what they want with it.
Yeah, and I think the majority of people generally do take stuff in a kind of well-intentioned, generous way, are interested in learning and kind of can figure out that nuance. It's the minority of people who take things out of context, sometimes deliberately, right? Whereas the majority are pretty good, interested, curious, generous, fairly proactive people, would you say?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, good. That's been my experience. But yeah, it's always a worry that you're going to get some people who take things completely out of context and blow it up, or it goes sideways. But generally it tends to be not, I think that's not the biggest problem. It tends to be a minority of people who do that, hopefully. It sounds like you'd encourage other people or communicators to really actively take to these platforms if they can, if they've got the interest and the time. Do you think the role of academics or science communicators are changing? Is it going to be different in the next 5 or 10 years? Or how is that going to look? Because there used to be quite a barrier between academics and universities, between kind of general population, that communication between those.
Yeah, I love that question. I do think it's an exciting time in that barrier, that wall is being taken down in terms of just, hey, here's this information and you shouldn't have to have this access or know this jargon to read the scientific article to really understand or benefit from it. And so I think, yes, I think it's going to be more and more important to be able to learn how to share and communicate this information, and to just, part of it too, I mean, a huge part of doing research is awareness, and then, helping people see the value and the need for it. And then even when it comes to things like funding or being able to communicate those ideas. So, I think it's huge. And I think that it's a really it's a really cool time to have to not to just lessen that separation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you do a great job of it, and thank you for doing that, because it's such important work, and I'm so pleased to see that people like you who are so impressive and are doing such a great job of it. So thank you for doing that work. It's great.
Thank you. That means a lot.